The rain came sideways into Chippenham that morning, the kind of gray October rain that does not fall so much as arrive, already soaked into the bones of the world before it touches the ground. It struck the tiled roof of the coaching inn yard in a steady hiss, pooled in the ruts left by 100 wheels, ran in dark threads along the harness leather of 4 tired horses stamping in their traces. She sat rigid inside the carriage, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that the seams of her gloves whitened at the knuckle. The window beside her had fogged with her own breath, and she did not wipe it clear. There seemed, that morning, nothing beyond the glass worth seeing, only wet cobbles, and a boy with a lantern moving between the horses' heads, and her own reflection, pale and composed, in the particular way of a woman who has trained herself for 6 weeks not to weep in public. The carriage had left Bath before the sky had properly decided to lighten. She had said her goodbyes in a hallway lit by a single candle, to a household that had risen only far enough to see her gone. No one had come to the yard to wave her off. She had not expected them to. She was thinking, when the sound began, of a lending library on Milsom Street, and a chair by a window, and a glove she had mended there with small stitches she'd been rather proud of, thinking of it the way one thinks of a country one has already left, fondly, and with a kind of grief that has stopped expecting anything further. It was the innkeeper who heard the horse first. She saw him turn toward the gate, wiping his hands on his apron, his face arranging itself into the particular alertness reserved for gentlemen who arrive at speed. Then she heard it herself, hooves against wet stone, a rhythm too urgent for the hour, too urgent for the weather, growing rather than fading, until a horse came through the archway at a pace that scattered the ostlers and sent the lantern boy stumbling back against the wall. The rider did not call out. He did not need to. Something in the way the horse was brought up short, in the way he swung down before it had fully stopped, told her, before she had even turned her head, before she had allowed herself to hope it, precisely who had come. She did not move. She found, in fact, that she had stopped breathing altogether, her hand frozen on the strap of the carriage door, the rain drumming on the roof above her like something counting down. How it had come to this, a coaching yard, a stranger's horse lathered and blowing in the rain, a woman sent north before dawn by those who loved her least, is a story that began, as such stories often do, not with a horse at all, but with a torn hem, a cruel remark, and a ballroom full of candlelight 6 weeks before, in a city that had not yet learned her name was worth remembering. Late September in Bath announced itself in smells before anything else. Coal smoke thinning into the damp morning air, the river, carrying its particular scent of stone and weed, past the townhouses on Laura Place, and beneath it all, in the narrow room she occupied at the top of the house, the smell of tallow candles burned too low the night before, because good wax was not wasted on a poor relation's ledger work. She had risen, as she always rose, before the household stirred. There was a particular quality to that hour, gray, uncomplaining, hers alone, in which she sat at the small deal table beneath the window and drew the account books toward her, with the same care another woman might reserve for a lover's letters. 2 years she had kept them, 2 years of columns balanced in a hand, neater than her aunt's own, of household debts quietly reconciled, of small economies suggested in the margins and adopted the following week, as though they had occurred to someone else entirely. No one thanked her for it. No one was meant to know it was her work at all. Below stairs, by 7, the day's true business began, not the ledgers, which existed in a kind of respectable secrecy, but the ordinary humiliations of her position, distributed so evenly through the hours that she had long since stopped marking them as humiliations at all. She fetched. She mended. She sat with her aunt's correspondence and her cousin's complaints, and she made herself small in doorways so that no one need step around her. It was this last habit, of making herself small, that had kept the blue muslin gown alive 3 seasons past its natural death. She had turned the hem twice, taken in the waist when grief had thinned her the winter her uncle died, and mended the left sleeve so carefully, with stitches so fine, that only a seamstress's eye, or her own, which knew every thread of it, could have found the seam at all. It hung now over the back of her chair, pressed and ready, because the Wingate ball was 3 days off, and she would attend it as she attended everything, present, useful, unremarked. Her cousin's gowns had arrived that week from the modiste on Milsom Street, boxed in tissue and ribbon, and had been laid across the bed downstairs, for admiration rather than wear, as though the admiring were the point of them. Cassandra had helped unpack them without envy, or with an envy so old and so thoroughly managed that it no longer announced itself as envy at all, only as a small, familiar ache, the kind one learns to carry, the way one learns to carry cold hands in November, without remark, without expectation of remedy. She did not yet know that a torn glove, a lending library, and a man who had not danced in 6 years were waiting for her on the other side of that ballroom door. The night arrived wet at the edges, the kind of September evening that could not decide between summer and autumn, and so gave a little of each. A low fog off the river, candlelight bleeding gold through the townhouse windows on Laura Place, the smell of beeswax and hothouse flowers pressed too close together in rooms not built to hold so many bodies at once. By 9 o'clock, the ballroom was full. By past, it was loud in the particular way of rooms where everyone is watching everyone else and pretending otherwise. She wore the blue muslin. She had known, dressing, exactly what it was and was not. Clean, pressed, mended so well that a careless glance would find nothing wrong with it at all. She had hoped, without quite admitting the hope to herself, that no glance in that room would be anything but careless. Her cousin's glance was not careless. It found the left sleeve within the first quarter hour, across a distance of some 15 feet, through a crowd of at least 40 persons, with the accuracy of a woman who had spent a great many hours learning exactly where to look for another woman's weaknesses. She was radiant that night, there was no other word for it. In silk the color of a ripe plum, her hair dressed with pearls that had been her grandmother's, and she crossed the floor toward her cousin with a smile arranged for an audience rather than for the person it was ostensibly given to. "How clever you are," she said, not quietly, "to make one gown last a lady an entire season. Indeed, several seasons, by the look of that sleeve." The nearest cluster of guests went still in the particular way that precedes laughter, testing the ground before committing to it. Someone did laugh, a short bright sound quickly smothered. A fan moved. A gentleman looked away with the studied indifference of a man who has decided not to have witnessed something. Her aunt, standing not 4 feet distant, with a glass of ratafia and an expression of serene unconcern, said nothing at all. She did not reprove her daughter. She did not so much as glance toward her niece. She turned instead to the lady beside her and remarked upon the quality of the orchestra, as though the moment required no more attention than the weather. Cassandra felt the heat climb her throat before it reached her face, which was, she thought with the small distant part of her mind, that always stood apart and observed even her own humiliations, at least useful. She should have a moment yet, before the color gave her away entirely. She kept her chin level, she kept her hands still at her sides, though she was aware of every stitch in that sleeve, as though it had been drawn in ink upon her skin. She was calculating, already, the shortest distance to the door, past the potted ferns, along the wall, before the second dance was called, when the crowd nearest the entrance shifted and went quiet in a wholly different way, a way that had nothing to do with her at all. It was not the quiet of a room settling, but the quiet of a room being seized. Conversations broke off mid-word. A fan stopped its lazy motion in a lady's hand and did not resume. Somewhere near the punch table, a gentleman's laugh curdled into silence so abruptly that the sound seemed to hang a moment in the air before it, too, died. She did not turn at once. She had learned, in 2 years of small humiliations, that turning too quickly only confirmed one had been watching for rescue. But the change in the room pressed against her like a change in weather, and when at last she looked, she understood why every candle in that hall seemed suddenly to burn brighter, why every gaze had swung as one body toward the doorway. He was crossing the floor, not toward the card room, not toward his hostess, not toward any of the mothers who had spent the better part of 6 years angling their daughters into his path only to watch him retreat, always, into some private and unreachable grief. He walked with the unhurried economy of a man who had never in his life needed to hurry, and the crowd parted before him the way water parts before a keel, each guest discovering some sudden interest in their neighbor rather than be caught staring outright, though every one of them stared. He was walking toward her. She felt the absurd impulse to look behind herself, to confirm there was no one else standing in that particular unfortunate stretch of floor. No Julia freshly triumphant, no cousin more deserving of whatever this was. There was no one. There was only the wall and the potted fern, and her own reflection caught faint and trembling in the long window glass. A young woman in a twice-mended gown, with her chin still held level out of pure stubbornness now, rather than any hope of dignity. He stopped before her. Up close he was taller than she had understood from across the room, and older about the eyes than his years, with the particular stillness of a man long practiced at giving nothing away. He did not smile. He did not offer the small pleasantries that passed between strangers, thrown together by circumstance. He looked at her as though she were the only occupant of the room worth the trouble of looking at, and said, in a voice pitched to carry precisely as far as it needed to, and no further, "Miss Hale, you will do me the honor of the first dance." It was not a question. She understood, distantly, that it had not been framed as one, and that this too was a kind of mercy, that he had left her nothing to refuse, no possibility of a stammered decline that would only compound the evening's cruelty. Behind her, she heard her aunt's glass of ratafia meet its saucer with a small, unmistakable clatter. She did not curtsy so much as remember, a half-beat late, that curtsying was expected of her, and the movement came out stiffer than she would have liked, her hand rising to meet his, because there was nothing else for it to do. His fingers closed over hers, not warm, not cold, simply certain, the grip of a man who had decided a thing and would not be troubled to decide it twice. She thought, absurdly, of the ledger columns she balanced each week for a household that did not thank her for it, the way a sum either closed or it did not, with no possibility of half measure. This was like that. He had opened the column. She had no choice now but to let it close. The musicians, who had faltered mid-phrase at the sight of him crossing the floor, found their place again, with the ragged eagerness of men grateful to have somewhere to look besides the couple before them. The cotillion began. She had danced it perhaps a dozen times in her life, always at the edges of rooms like this one, always with younger sons who partnered her out of obligation to their mothers, and forgot her name before the set ended. She had never danced it under so many eyes at once. He moved with the economy of a man who found dancing neither pleasure nor hardship, but simply another social obligation to be discharged correctly, and yet there was nothing careless in it. His hand at the small of her back settled with the same deliberate precision he had shown in crossing the room, as though he had measured the distance beforehand and found it exact. She kept her eyes somewhere near his cravat, because meeting his gaze felt like a further exposure she could not yet afford, and because she was aware, with the sharp peripheral awareness of the humiliated, of every face along the wall, her aunt's, gone the color of old parchment, her cousin's, arranged with visible effort into something like indifference, a dozen others she did not know, all turned toward her now as though she had grown suddenly interesting, which she supposed, in the space of one sentence, she had. Neither of them spoke through the first movement. She told herself this was because the steps required attention, though she suspected he had never in his life required attention for anything so simple as a cotillion. It was only as they turned, his hand briefly relinquishing hers, then finding it again with that same unhurried certainty, that he said, low enough that only she could hear it, "You held your chin the same way before I asked as after. I found that worth crossing a room for." She had no answer ready. She gave him none. But she noted, with the same private precision she brought to a torn seam or an uneven column of figures, that he had not asked her to dance out of pity, and that this, whatever else it proved to be, was not nothing. The music turned again, and with it, the whole complicated architecture of the dance, and she found herself facing him once more with the peculiar clarity that comes of having nothing further to lose. He was not, she decided, a man who filled silence for its own comfort. He let it sit between them, the way another man might have let a good wine breathe. "You dance as though you would rather be doing sums," he observed. "I generally would," she said. "Sums resolve. This merely repeats." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more the memory of one, unused so long it had grown stiff in its hinges. Most women tell me I dance beautifully. Most women want something from you. And you do not? I want the next figure to end, so I may stop being looked at. He did not laugh, but she felt, absurdly, that he had wanted to. His hand at her waist as they turned was neither too firm nor too light. The hand of a man, accustomed to command, who had learned, at some cost, to govern it. You might have simply thanked me, he said, and let the room forget you by morning. I might have, but you did not ask me to dance so that I should flatter you afterward, I think. You asked because my cousin was cruel and you disliked it. I should be a poor return on that impulse if I lied to you now. He looked at her then, with an attention she felt along her arms, like the touch of cold air through a cracked window, not unpleasant, only sudden, only new. No, he said, you would not. At the edge of the room, where the candlelight thinned into shadow near the doorway, the Duke's manservant stood with the particular stillness of a man who has spent 6 years watching his master hold himself apart from every gathering he was obliged to attend. Greaves had seen him bow to duchesses without warmth and decline 100 eligible smiles without regret. He had never seen him lean, however slightly, toward a partner mid-turn, as though the ordinary courtesies of distance had become, for the length of one dance, an inconvenience. He had seen grief settle into a man like frost into a window, patterning everything, admitting no clear view through. He had not expected it to thaw over a mended blue muslin gown and a chin held level in humiliation. The cotillion drew toward its close. Cassandra was aware of the return of the ordinary world pressing at the dance's edges, the whispers resuming their proper volume, her aunt's face regaining its color, Julia's gaze fixed somewhere just past her shoulder, as though she herself had become a fold in the wallpaper. The Duke released her hand with the same unhurried care he had first taken it. "Miss Hale," he said, and bowed, not deeply, not for show, but as one bows to an equal one has only just troubled to notice. The carriage ride home was conducted in the particular silence that follows a public wound too fresh to name. Rain had begun somewhere past the pump room, fine and persistent, ticking against the glass like a clock counting something other than hours. The mother sat rigid against the squabs, her gloved hands folded with the stillness of a woman composing a letter she has not yet decided how to word. The daughter stared out at the wet, lamplit street, her jaw set in the particular manner of someone reciting an insult to herself for safekeeping, to be used later. It was not until they had gained the privacy of the drawing room on Laura Place, the fire banked low, the maid dismissed, the door shut with more force than the hour required, that the mother spoke. "He has not stood up with anyone in 6 years." It was not a question. She said it the way one might report a fire seen at a distance, still calculating which way the wind blew. The daughter's composure, held so carefully through the carriage ride, came apart at last. She has nothing. She has less than nothing. She has a mended gown and a dead father's debts, and a place in this house on sufferance, and he crossed an entire ballroom. I am aware of what he did. Everyone is aware of what he did. That is rather the difficulty, mother. The mother moved to the window, though there was nothing to see beyond her own reflection and the rain. She was a woman who had spent 2 decades converting small humiliations into strategy, and she did not intend to stop now. A duke's attention is not a promise. It is a weather system. It may pass over a house and never return. And if it does not pass? The question hung between them, unanswered, because both understood its true shape. If it did not pass, the calculations of the entire household, the careful cultivation of the daughter's prospects, the alliances half built over 2 seasons of dinners and morning calls, the very order of who owed whom deference under this roof, would require redrawing entirely, and not in the daughter's favor. "She has no dowry," the mother said at last, as though reciting a comfort to herself. "No connections he could not find better elsewhere. Men of his rank do not marry companions. They admire them, briefly, as one admires a stray dog that has performed some unlikely trick, and then they remember themselves. And if he does not remember himself in time? The mother did not answer at once. She was already turning the problem over, as she might turn over a bolt of cloth to check for a flaw in the weave, where it might be cut, how much could be salvaged, what could be quietly discarded before anyone thought to ask its price. Upstairs, unaware that her name had become a small, cold calculation in her aunt's mind, Cassandra was folding the blue muslin gown with the same care she gave to anything mended once and likely to need mending again. The rain had started before noon, a thin gray persistence that Bath seemed to manufacture, especially for errands no one wished to run. She was sent for 2 volumes of sermons and a book on husbandry her uncle had requested and forgotten twice already, and she went on foot because the carriage was needed for calls that mattered more than she did. The library on Milsom Street smelled of damp wool and old paper, a smell she had always found more honest than the perfume of drawing rooms. She was still shaking the water from her bonnet when she saw him, not seeking her, or so it seemed, standing at the far shelf with a book open in his hands, and not, she thought, actually reading it. He looked up before she could retreat. "Miss Hale, Your Grace." She dropped the smallest curtsy propriety allowed, the kind that costs nothing and commits to nothing. "You are alone." "I am generally alone, sir. It is the natural condition of a companion sent on errands." Something in his face moved, briefly, like a man recalculating a sum he'd thought settled. He closed the book without marking his place. "Do you find it agreeable, solitude?" "I find it economical. It asks nothing of me I cannot supply myself." He was quiet at that, and she wondered if she had spoken too plainly again, the old habit her aunt called forwardness. And she privately called, "Not lying." But he did not look offended. He looked, if anything, like a man listening to a language he had forgotten he once spoke fluently. "I have not been in this room since my wife died," he said, and the words landed with no more weight than if he had remarked on the weather, which made them heavier. "She used to read aloud to me from that shelf, poorly. She had no talent for it and no patience for correction." Cassandra did not offer sympathy. She had learned long ago that sympathy offered to grief too quickly is often refused. She said instead, "Then perhaps the shelf remembers her better than the room does." He looked at her for a long moment, rain ticking against the window behind him, and she saw something loosen very slightly behind his eyes, the way a knot loosens under patient fingers rather than force. "You say the strangest true things, Miss Hale." "I have had little practice saying false ones pleasantly, Your Grace. I was never taught the art." "No," he said, "I do not think you were." And there was, in the word, something that was almost, not quite, gratitude. She found her sermons on the shelf behind him, and did not linger, though some part of her, small and unadmitted, wished the errand were longer, the rain heavier, the walk home delayed by any decent excuse at all. The rain had not lessened by the time she returned to her chair near the window, and the library had emptied further still, so that only the clerk remained, dozing behind his ledger, and the man who did not belong among sermons and subscription novels any more than a hawk belongs among sparrows. She set the volumes she had chosen upon the table, and, in settling herself, felt the small tug and give of a seam long overdue for attention. The gray kid glove she had worn since spring, its side seam parted at the thumb from 2 years of careful, unlavish wear. She drew her needle case from her reticule, for she carried one always, the way other women carried scent or smelling salts, and set to the work without ceremony. He did not speak. She was aware, in the particular way one is aware of weather changing before a single drop falls, that he watched her, not idly, as a man watches a fire for want of better occupation, but with the attention he might have given a ledger he suspected of some error he could not yet name. Her stitches were small, even, unhurried. She did not glove her hands in false modesty about the work, nor did she explain it, for she had long ago concluded that explanation was itself a kind of apology, and she had nothing here to apologize for. The thread was gray also, chosen to disappear, though it did not disappear entirely, and she thought, without vanity, that a careful eye would always find the mend if it looked for it. "You do that as though it were nothing," he said at last. "It is nothing, your grace. A torn seam is the smallest of household griefs. I have known men to send to London for gloves rather than mend the ones they had. Then those men have never wanted for money," she said, "and I have never had the luxury of not wanting for it." He said nothing further to that, and she did not press it, for she had learned that some silences were answers enough. It was the clerk who broke the quiet, calling her name from the far desk, a subscription matter requiring her signature, some small correction to the household account she had registered under her aunt's name, as she registered all such things, and she rose at once, gathering her chosen volumes under her arm, her mind already halfway to the errand. She did not think of the glove again until she was near the door, and by then it seemed a trifling thing, easily retrieved on the morrow, not worth the indignity of returning across the room under his gaze to fetch it. She did not see him lift it from the table where she had left it, did not see how carefully he turned it in his hands, as though it were a thing of consequence rather than mended kid leather, before he set it, without a word to the dozing clerk, into the inner pocket of his coat. The house on Laura Place received her return with its usual indifference, the same draught beneath the drawing-room door, the same smell of cold mutton drifting up from the kitchens. But her cousin was waiting in the hall, with an expression that had clearly been composed some minutes in advance, the way one arranges a face before a mirror. "You were an age at the library," her cousin said. "One would think you had taken up residence there." She said only that the subscription required renewal, and moved to pass, but her cousin's hand found the newel post first, blocking the stair with the appearance of idleness. "They say His Grace was seen walking that way himself." A small laugh, not quite steady. Milsom Street is a public thoroughfare, of course. Anyone might walk it. Anyone might. And yet, her cousin's gaze traveled over her, the plain gray pelisse, the volumes under her arm, as though searching for some evidence of conquest hidden in the ordinary cloth. "I confess, I cannot account for it. A man of his consequence, and you without—" She stopped herself, but the sentence had already arrived at its destination without needing to be finished. Without fortune, without name, without anything a ballroom would trouble itself to notice. "Perhaps he finds the library convenient," she answered, and went up the stairs before the reply could be improved upon, leaving her cousin below with her hand still on the post, her anxiety not quite disguised by her scorn, for mockery, she had learned, was often only fear that had not yet found its proper clothing. Below, in the small morning room that smelled of beeswax and old correspondence, her aunt sat already at the writing desk, though the hour was not one she commonly kept for letters. The candle had been lit early. 2 sheets lay before her, the first crossed through and abandoned, the second begun in a hand-rounder and more careful than her ordinary scrawl, as though the recipient required a delicacy her daily correspondence did not. "My dear Mrs. Pruitt," it began, "I trust this finds you in tolerable health, and write to you now upon a matter I believe may answer to both our conveniences." She paused there, the pen suspended, and looked toward the window, where the last gray light was going out of the square. 6 weeks, perhaps, before the northern roads grew too foul for easy travel. Time enough, if the matter were managed with dispatch, and no more remarked upon than any ordinary visit to a relation in want of nursing. She dipped the pen again. "My niece, Miss Hale, has of late seemed low in spirits, and would, I think, benefit greatly from a change of air, and from occupation that might steady a mind grown restless in idleness." She read the sentence back once, satisfied with its innocence, and did not write what she was thinking, that a girl who could not be persuaded by scarcity might yet be removed by distance, and that some doors were more easily shut than argued closed. The letter was sealed and sent before the ink had properly dried, and 3 days later the fete at Widcombe opened under a sky the color of skimmed milk, threatening rain, that did not fall until evening. She had not wished to come. She had said as much to her aunt, who had not troubled to answer, only handed her a basket of preserves for the vicarage stall, and told her to make herself useful, which was, she had learned, the aunt's word for invisible. She was arranging jars of quince, when she felt the crowd shift near the gate, that particular alteration in the noise of a gathering when someone of consequence arrives, voices dropping half a tone, backs straightening without anyone having decided to straighten them. She did not look up. She had learned that much, at least, that to look up too quickly was to confess an interest she did not care to own. He found her without appearing to have sought her, which she understood by now to be a skill and not an accident. "Miss Hale." He inclined his head over the preserves as though they were of genuine interest to him. "Your aunt's quince, or your own?" "Mine," she said. "My aunt does not care for the labor of stirring a pot for 2 hours in September heat." "And you do?" "I care for the result. The labor is merely the price of it." Something in his face moved, not quite a smile, more the shadow a smile leaves behind before it arrives. He did not buy a jar, he offered his arm instead, and she took it, because to refuse, in front of the vicar's wife and 3 matrons of the parish, already craning their necks over the bunting, would have drawn more notice than acceptance. They walked among the stalls, the tombola, the tea-urn steaming under its awning, a boy selling ribbons his mother had dyed herself, and he asked her opinion of things with an attentiveness that unsettled her more than flattery would have done, because it was not flattery. He asked what she thought of the vicar's sermon on stewardship. He asked whether she found Bath's society tedious. She answered him honestly both times, and both times he laughed, low and brief, as a man laughs who has forgotten the shape of the sound in his own throat. "You are the only person," he said, "who has told me the truth twice in one afternoon. Then you have been keeping poor company, Your Grace." "I begin to think so." Behind them, she was aware, without turning, of Mrs. Wingate's bonnet, motionless among the stalls, and of Julia beside her, very still, watching the Duke's reserve thin like ice under a thumbnail, and understanding, as clearly as Cassandra did, exactly what it meant. The commotion began at the charity stall, where a linen draper's wife had set up her wares beside a ledger book gone the color of weak tea, and a merchant in a snuff-colored coat was insisting, with the particular loudness of a man who suspects himself in the wrong, that he had paid for 4 yards of ribbon and been charged for 6. The vicar's wife stood wringing her hands over the account book, as though it might confess its errors if stared at long enough. A small crowd had gathered, the way crowds gather around any dispute involving money, which is to say instantly and with great relish. She did not mean to intervene. But the ledger was open on the trestle table, and she had read enough columns of figures in 2 years of the Wingate household accounts to see, at a glance, that the error was neither the draper's wife's nor the merchant's, but a simple transposition. 6 shillings entered as 6 pence, then carried forward twice, compounding itself down the page like a stain spreading through cloth. "If I may," she said, and drew the book toward her before anyone could tell her she oughtn't. She found the fault in under a minute, traced it aloud in a voice pitched only for the vicar's wife and the draper's wife to hear, so that no one need be shamed by it, not the merchant, not the woman who had kept the book. She showed them the line, the small numeral that had gone astray, and set it right with the stub of pencil offered her, her hand quick and unhurried both at once. The merchant paid the difference. The draper's wife thanked her 3 times. The vicar's wife looked at her for a long moment afterward, with an expression Cassandra could not immediately place, until she understood it was simple respect, unadorned by pity, which she had had so little occasion to receive that she nearly did not recognize its shape. "You have a head for figures, Miss Hale." "I have had occasion to practice, ma'am." "So I perceive." The vicar's wife glanced once, briefly, toward the Duke, who had not moved from where he stood a little apart, watching with the stillness of a man cataloging something for later use. "Some occasions serve us better than we know at the time." She said nothing to that, only closed the ledger and set the pencil down beside it, and turned back toward the stalls as though nothing at all had happened, though she was aware, as she walked, of a new quality in the vicar's wife's attention, something that had shifted from courtesy to interest, the way weather shifts before a change one cannot yet name. Behind her, Mrs. Wingate's bonnet had not moved, but Julia had turned fully now, her gloved hands folded very tight, watching the small crowd disperse with its murmured admiration and understanding, as Cassandra herself was only beginning to, that a ledger, of all things, had just told the truth about her when nothing else would. The stalls had thinned toward the tea tent by the time he came to stand beside her at last, not before her, as other men contrived to do, but beside, so that they both faced the same disordered table of jams and ribbon jars, as though examining a matter of mutual concern. "You did not enjoy the attention," he said. "I did not seek it." "No. I noticed that also." He turned one of the jars idly, reading a label he could not have cared for. "You corrected the sum before she asked you to. Most people wait to be asked." Most people are not obliged to know the difference between a farthing owed and a farthing paid. He was quiet at that, the particular quiet she had begun to recognize in him, not absence, but weight, as though each silence cost him something to hold, and he held it anyway. The bunting overhead moved once in a small wind and settled. "My wife kept no ledgers," he said at last, and the sentence arrived so plainly, so without preamble, that she understood he had chosen the moment rather than stumbled into it. She had no head for them, and no interest in acquiring one. It was not a fault in her, it was simply not her nature. He paused. "She died of a fever, in the autumn, 6 years ago now. I have not danced since, until Laura Place." She did not say she was sorry. The words rose in her, ready and useless, the kind of thing said to fill a space rather than to answer it, and she set them aside, as she might set aside a thread too weak to hold a seam. Instead she watched him, not his face only, but the whole stance of him, the set of his shoulders against a grief he had clearly carried so long it had become a kind of posture, indistinguishable now from the man himself. "6 years is a long time to hold a single note," she said finally. "It must ache, keeping it so exactly." Something moved in him then that no expression of sympathy had managed to move. She saw it happen, a small give, like a stitch pulled taut finally released, his gaze steadying on her with an attention that had, until that moment, been carefully rationed. "You do not offer comfort," he said. "I have found comfort is often a thing people give themselves credit for, rather than the person receiving it. And what do you offer instead? Attention. It is cheaper, and I think truer." He almost smiled. She saw the shape of it begin, and then withhold itself, as though he distrusted his own face's willingness. Behind them, the vicar's wife called some pleasant instruction to a child with a hoop, and the ordinary noise of the fete went on, indifferent to the two of them standing very still amid the jam jars, while somewhere behind that, unseen but not unfelt, Julia's gloved hands remained folded, and Mrs. Wingate's bonnet, at last, had begun very slowly to turn. Mrs. Wingate's bonnet completed its turn at last, and beneath its brim her eyes found her nephew by marriage's daughter and the widowed duke standing among the preserves, and something in her expression set like cooling wax, pleasant still, but fixed. She said nothing. She had no need to. The vicarage garden had eyes enough of its own, and by the time the last jam jar was auctioned off for the roof fund, 3 separate matrons had already begun composing the sentence they would carry home to their husbands' dinner tables. The Duke did not see this. He had turned his attention back to the fete's small commerce, to a child's hoop rolling crookedly across the grass, and for a quarter of an hour he permitted himself the rare, unrationed pleasure of simply standing near someone who did not require him to be anything other than attentive. It was Greaves, 3 days later, who saw what his master had not. The valet brought in the shaving water at the usual hour, set down the razor with its usual care, and said, without preamble, that he had heard certain things spoken of in the lower rooms of the pump yard, not maliciously, he was careful to note, but with the particular relish that attaches itself to any story involving rank and a woman without fortune. "Spoken of how," the Duke said, not turning from the glass. "As a curiosity, Your Grace. At present, curiosities are indulged." Greaves folded a linen cloth with more precision than the task required. "They are not indulged for long, if they persist past a season without resolving into something the drawing-rooms can name. A widowed duke's attentions to a poor companion will be called charming, for exactly as long as it costs no one anything to call it so." The razor paused against the strop. "And after that?" After that, your grace, it will be called something else. Ambition, on her part, however unjustly. Folly, on yours. Bath is a small city, dressed as a large one, and its charity has a very short season. Greaves met his master's eyes in the glass. A liberty he permitted himself perhaps once a year. Miss Hale has no fortune to absorb the talk, no father to answer for her, no rank to make her attentions to you appear anything but presumption, however little presumption she has shown. The longer you wait to declare an intention, the more entirely the shape of the story will be decided by everyone except yourself. The Duke set down the razor. You think I have been slow. I think, your grace, that a man may hold a note so long he forgets the room is still listening. Greaves gathered the linens, unhurried, and moved toward the door. Society will not wait upon your grief a second time. It waited once, out of respect. It will not mistake a second silence for mourning. It will call it indifference, and act upon her accordingly, sooner, I think, than your grace expects. He withdrew, and the Duke remained before the glass a long while, water cooling untouched in the basin, turning over the particular weight of the word. Sooner. Rain had begun again by the time she was summoned to the small parlor at the back of the house, the one used for accounts and unwelcome news, its grate unlit even in October, as though warmth itself were rationed there along with everything else. She came with ink still on her fingers from the household ledger, and she saw, before a word was spoken, that the ledger itself lay closed upon the desk, squared with a precision that was not her own. "Sit," said the elder woman, though there was only the one hard chair, and she had already taken it. She remained standing, it seemed, of late, the safer posture. Your great-aunt Pruitt writes from Yorkshire. Her health fails her. The words came measured, rehearsed, somewhere upstairs, before ever they reached this cold room. She has neither daughter nor niece near enough to nurse her. It falls, therefore, to family, and you have, I think, no other claim upon your time that duty would not readily yield to. The fire that was not lit seemed, still, to make its absence felt between them. When am I to go? Thursday. The mail coach from the White Hart, before 6. A pause, weighed out like sugar in short supply. It is a kindness to her, and no small one to you, a household of your own occupation, in time, perhaps if you serve her well. Better prospects than can be looked for here. Better prospects. She let the phrase sit in the air a moment, turning it as one turns a coin to find the false stamp beneath the bright one. In a village 3 days distant, nursing a woman I have not seen since I was 11, with no acquaintance to write to me, and none, I think, meant to know where I have gone. You imagine slights where there is only family feeling. I imagine, she said, and her voice did not rise, though something beneath it had gone very still and very exact, the way water goes still just before it freezes, that a fortnight ago no one recalled Mrs. Pruitt existed at all. The silence that followed was not denial. Denial would at least have required effort. You will want your things packed by tomorrow evening, the elder woman said instead, rising, smoothing her skirts, as though the matter were already filed among settled accounts. I have asked Sarah to see to the trunk. There is no reason for delay, and every reason against it. Against it, not for haste, against delay. The distinction did not escape her, standing there with ink drying unnoticed on her hand, the fire unlit, the rain against the glass counting out, with a patience crueler than any words yet spoken, the few days she had left to be found before she was made, quite deliberately, impossible to find at all. She did not weep. That, at least, she would not give them, and so when the door had closed, and the sound of the elder woman's slippers had faded down the passage, she sat a long moment with the pen still in her hand, until the ink dried entirely, a small dark island on her finger, and then she rose and began, without haste, to do what she had been told. The trunk was smaller than she remembered it, or she had grown used, these 2 years, to owning more than she in fact owned. 2 gowns, a shawl gone thin at the fringe, the blue muslin, twice mended, folded now with a care that had nothing to do with its value, and everything to do with what it had witnessed, a ballroom, a silence, A hand offered across a floor that had wanted her gone before he crossed it. She smoothed the seam at the shoulder where her own stitches ran, small and even, nearly invisible unless one knew to look, and thought that this at least was hers entirely, made by her own hand out of what others had thrown away. She packed her workbox next, the needles, the thread wound tight on its bone spools, the thimble worn thin at the crown, from 2 years of accounts no one credited to her. She packed the single book that was truly her own, a gift from no one, bought with pin money saved a shilling at a time. She did not pack the gray glove, for she did not have it. She had lost it weeks ago at the library, and had grieved it privately, briefly, as one grieves a small thing that mattered out of proportion to its size. The injustice sat in her like a stone swallowed whole, not loud, not sharp, but present at every turn, in the folding of a stocking, in the closing of a drawer, in the particular silence of a house that had decided her absence before it had troubled to inform her of the decision. She thought of the fortnight past, of Mrs. Pruitt's name summoned out of 11 years' disuse, like a coat taken down from an attic, specifically because it was unfashionable enough that no one would ask after it. She thought that she had no letter to write, no friend to warn, no standing from which to refuse, and that this, not the packing, not the leaving, was the true cruelty of it, that obedience required no reason, only the absence of any means to do otherwise. She folded the last of her linen and closed the trunk's lid, and the latch caught with a small, definite sound, like a door somewhere shutting on a room she had only just begun to believe might be hers. Outside, the rain continued its patient counting against the glass, and she stood listening to it, dry-eyed, already gone in every way but the one that mattered, which was time. Below stairs, in the small parlor where the fire had been allowed to burn low because guests were not expected, the daughter turned the stem of an unused wineglass between her fingers and found she could not look at her mother directly. She kept the books 2 years, she said, and never once let them show it. Do you recall the Michaelmas accounts? The ones Papa praised without knowing whose hand had balanced them? Her mother did not glance up from the letter she was sealing. A note to the coachman, confirming the hour, confirming the horses, confirming that nothing should delay a departure already decided upon, as though delay were the only remaining sin. I recall, you did not think it worth mentioning at the time. That is not an answer. It is the only one required. The wax dropped, dark and final, onto paper. Sentiment is a luxury of women who need not marry well. You are not one of them, and neither, whatever she has lately persuaded herself, is your cousin. The daughter set down the glass with more force than she intended, and the small chime of it against the table sounded, in that quiet room, almost like an accusation. He crossed the whole of the ballroom for her. Every soul at that ball saw it. You cannot fold a man's regard the way you fold a gown into a trunk and send it north. I can do a great deal more than you credit me for, her mother said, and there was something almost gentle in the way she said it, the gentleness of long practice, of a woman who had spent decades convincing herself that steering the fates of others was itself a form of love. In 6 months, no one will recall a cotillion. They will recall whom she married, if she marries at all, and whether it was a Yorkshire curate or nothing. That is the whole of what Bath remembers, outcomes, not gestures. And if he asks after her? Then he will be told what is true, that she has gone to nurse a sick relation, as any dutiful woman might. There is no scandal in duty. She rose, smoothing her skirts, and for a moment something crossed her face that might, in a less guarded woman, have been called doubt, a flicker there, and extinguished before it could be named, folded away as neatly as the letter now sealed in her hand. You are troubled because you liked her better than you have ever admitted, and because you know precisely what it cost her to be admired in your own house, for 1/2 of one evening. That is not conscience, Julia. That is envy dressed respectably. Go to bed. The daughter did not go to bed at once. She stood by the dying fire a long while, turning over something small and unwelcome in her chest, something she could not yet call by its name, while upstairs the rain went on counting itself against the glass, indifferent to households and their arrangements, and a trunk sat latched and waiting for an hour not yet arrived. The Duke's carriage arrived at the house on Laura Place at 11 the following morning, an hour he had chosen with some care, for it was late enough to be proper and early enough to precede any other caller who might wish to claim the same ground. He came without his valet, which the butler who received him thought odd, and with his hat already in hand, before the door had fully opened, which the butler thought odder still. He was shown into the morning room, where the fire had been lit against a chill that had not yet burned off the night's rain, and where the mistress of the house received him with a composure so complete it might have been mistaken, by a less attentive man, for warmth. He did not sit. "I have come," he said, "to ask your permission to call upon your niece with an honorable intention. I would not have delayed even this long, had propriety allowed otherwise." The pause that followed was not hesitation. It was construction, a sentence being built with the same care a mason gives a wall he intends to last. "You are very good to think of it," she said, "but I fear you have come a little late. My niece left us yesterday, quite suddenly, to nurse an elderly relation in Yorkshire who has taken gravely ill. There was no time to send word. These things arrive without regard for anyone's convenience." Nothing in her face moved. That, more than any word, told him something had been arranged rather than suffered. "When did she leave the house?" "Early, before most of Bath was awake to see her go." He did not ask which road, nor which inn, nor at what hour precisely early might mean, for he understood that any further question would be answered with the same smooth, unbroken surface, and that surface would yield nothing by being pressed. He inclined his head instead, thanked her for her time, with a courtesy that cost him visibly more than it once would have, and turned toward the door. "You will forgive me," she added, as he reached it, "if I say I had not thought a man of your position troubled himself so far over a companion's comings and goings." "You are mistaken," he said, without turning back, "in thinking. It troubles me so far. It troubles me entirely." He left, before she could arrange her features into whatever answer that deserved. In the hall, the housemaid who had let him in stood pressed against the wall as though the wallpaper might absorb her, and when his eyes met hers for half a second longer than courtesy required, something in her own face flickered, the particular guilt of a woman who knows a true hour and has been told to forget it. The rain had begun by the time the basket of mended linens arrived at the Duke's door on Royal Crescent, carried by the same housemaid who had stood against the wallpaper that afternoon. She had not been sent for this purpose. She had asked to come, claiming the errand as her own, before another girl could take it, and Greaves, who noticed such small determined maneuvers in servants as he noticed everything else, met her at the servants' entrance, with the particular stillness of a man who suspects a gift is about to be offered, and does not wish to frighten it away. She set the basket down. She did not look at him directly. "The pillow slips wanted turning," she said, "and I thought it best done tonight, before—" She stopped. "Before," Greaves agreed, as though the sentence had been finished to his satisfaction. She twisted her apron in both hands, the way a person does when a thing has sat too long in the chest and wants only the smallest crack to come loose. "It isn't early, they mean," she said at last, quiet and quick, as though speed might make the words weigh less. "It's before first light. The mistress said the horses are to be put to at 4, so as none of the neighbors are about to see the carriage go, nor to ask after it after. Miss Cassandra don't know the hour's been moved. She thinks it's morning proper, 8 o'clock or near it, same as she was first told." Her eyes came up then, wet and furious in a way that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "It ain't right, sir. She's been kinder to me than the young mistress ever was, and now she's to be packed off in the dark like something shameful, and no one the wiser till she's gone." Greaves did not thank her extravagantly, for he understood that a girl risking her place wanted the information carried, not celebrated. He asked her only the name of the inn where the coach was hired, and whether it was the White Hart, and she said yes, the White Hart, same as always, and he said nothing more, only saw her out into the rain with an umbrella she had not asked for, and would not have thought to expect. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, a liberty he had not taken in 6 years, and found his master still awake, seated near a fire that had burned down to little more than a red seam in the dark. 4 o'clock, Greaves said, without preamble. Tomorrow. The White Hart. She does not know the hour has been moved. The Duke did not rise at once. He sat very still, the firelight moving over a face that had, for 6 years, given away almost nothing, and gave away, now, everything. He said nothing for the length of 3 breaths, and Greaves, who had learned over 6 years to read the silences of the house better than its words, did not fill it. He only crossed to the writing desk, opened the second drawer, the one that stuck slightly in damp weather, as it had this week, and drew out a small parcel wrapped in tissue that had gone soft with handling. He set it on the arm of the chair, near enough to be seen, not so near as to press it upon him. The Duke looked at it a long moment before he understood what it was. The glove. Gray Kid mended at the seam with small stitches that did not match, deliberately, the manufacturer's original thread. Stitches too careful to be careless, too visible to be ashamed of themselves. "You kept this," he said. "I did not think it my place to return it, sir, once I understood whose hand had done the mending." Greaves folded his own hands behind his back. "I thought perhaps it might be wanted, one day, more than the day it was lost." The Duke picked it up. It weighed nothing. It weighed, he found, a great deal. He thought of a lending room window with rain running down it, and a head bent over a needle with the same unhurried attention she might have given a duke's ledgers or a duke's excuses. He thought of a woman who had been told, publicly, in front of the whole assembled cruelty of Bath, that she was a thing to be mended at, and who had gone home and mended something anyway, quietly, for no one's approval. He thought of 4 o'clock, and the dark, and a coaching yard he had never had occasion to visit. "There will be no formal call," he said at last, and his voice had none of its usual leisure in it. "No card left in the morning, no note sent ahead to warn them I am coming. No, sir. I will not wait upon them the way a suitor waits upon a family's convenience, as though this were still theirs to arrange." He rose, and the movement was not the slow, deliberate rising of a man of 38, who had spent 6 years learning to want nothing quickly. "Have the curricle brought round before first light. I do not care what the roads are." "They will be poor this time of year, sir." "The rain." "Then we shall be wet," the Duke said, and there was, for the first time in longer than Greaves cared to measure, something almost like haste in him, not the haste of a man late for an appointment, but the haste of a man who has only just understood how very late he already is. He closed his hand around the glove and did not set it down again. The White Hart yard smelled of wet straw and lamp oil at 5:30, and the rain had not stopped since midnight, a fine, persistent rain, the kind that did not fall so much as settle, finding its way under collars and into the seams of gloves. She stood beneath the overhang with her one trunk corded shut beside her, watching the ostlers move between the horses with lanterns that made small, trembling circles of light on the cobbles. No one had come to see her off. That had been arranged too, though no one had said so aloud. A departure so early that farewells became unnecessary, so quiet that the household could go on sleeping and wake to find the matter already settled. She had folded her few good things herself the night before, by a single candle, with hands that did not shake though she had expected them to. The blue muslin she left behind. She would have no use for it where she was going, and she found she did not want to carry it. The coachman called the hour. A woman with 2 children pushed past her toward the forward seats, and she took the place left to her, the one nearest the door, where the rain came in hardest when the window did not sit true in its frame. She had told herself, in the candlelight, that this was no more than what she had always known, that charity has its own arithmetic, and a poor relation is moved about like a piece of furniture that has become inconvenient in one room and might yet prove useful in another. She had told herself she was not owed an explanation, still less a farewell, from a man who had known her 6 weeks and owed her nothing at all. She had told herself this so many times that she had very nearly made herself believe it. The coach lurched. Wheels found the ruts of the yard, and the yard gave way to the street, and the street to the dark beyond the last lit window of the town. And Bath, the pump room, the Crescent, the library on Milsom Street where she had sat with her mending in the window light, fell away behind her without ceremony, as though it had never particularly wanted her there to begin with. She did not weep. She had promised herself that much, at least, in the candlelight, that whatever else the morning took from her, it would not have that. She watched the rain instead, streaking sideways across the glass, and thought, with the particular clarity of a woman who has stopped expecting anything, that this was simply how such stories ended for women like her. Quietly, before witnesses, in the cold part of the morning, when no one troubled to notice. The inn at Chippenham announced itself first by smell: wet straw, tallow smoke, the sourish tang of horses standing too long in rain, before the coachman called the change of team, and the carriage rolled beneath the arch into a yard slick with mud and lantern light. She had slept, or something near it, her head against the cold glass, and woke to the particular stillness of wheels no longer turning. 15 miles. She knew it because the guard had said so at the last stop, cheerfully, as though the number meant nothing at all, as though 15 miles were not the precise distance between the life she had known and the one she was being delivered into, aunt and duty and Yorkshire cold. She stepped down to stretch her limbs while the ostlers worked, and stood beneath the inn's dripping eave, watching fresh horses led out steaming into the yard, their breath white in the lamp glow, their harness jingling with the particular patience of animals accustomed to work before dawn. She drew her cloak closer. She did not permit herself to think of Bath, or of Milsom Street, or of the way morning light had once fallen through a library window onto a glove she had mended, without thinking anyone would notice. It was the sound that reached her first, not thunder, though for a moment her tired mind offered her that word, but hooves, many of them, coming hard down the London road, faster than any mail coach had business going in such weather. The ostlers paused with the traces half buckled. A stable boy straightened, lantern raised, and then the horse came under the arch, at a pace that scattered gravel, and sent a boy diving clear of the gate, its rider low over its neck, greatcoat black, and heavy with rain, hat gone, somewhere on the road behind him. She did not move. She told herself, in the half-second she had to tell herself anything, that it could not be him. That gentleman of 38 with grey already at the temples did not ride 15 miles before breakfast in weather fit for no one. And then the horse checked hard, hooves skidding on the wet stone, and she saw, beneath the dripping brim of no hat at all, a face she had not expected to see again this side of Yorkshire. He swung down before the animal had fully stopped. He did not look at the ostlers, or at her aunt's coachman, or at the fresh team standing harnessed and ready to carry her north. He looked only at her, standing beneath the eave, with her cloak drawn tight, and her breath gone entirely still, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, while the rain went on falling into the lantern light between them. He crossed the yard in 4 strides, boots splashing through standing water, and did not stop until he stood at the carriage door, close enough that she could see the rain running from his jaw, the exhaustion beneath his eyes, the way his hands, bare and reddened with cold, hung open at his sides, as though he had forgotten what hands were for. He did not speak first. He reached into the breast of his greatcoat, slowly, the way a man moves when he wishes to be understood rather than feared, and drew out something small, folded twice against the wet, and held it toward her in the space between them. She looked down. A glove. Gray kid, worn soft at the palm, the seam at the thumb mended in small, close stitches that any other eye would have missed entirely. Stitches she knew as she knew her own handwriting, because she had set them herself, weeks ago, in the hushed light of the lending library, and had left the glove behind on the table without once thinking of it again. She had not known it was lost. She had certainly not known it was found. "You kept it," she said, and her voice came out lower than she intended, half lost beneath the drum of rain on the inn's slate roof. "I did not know, at first, that I meant to." He did not lower his eyes from hers. Rain caught in the dark of his lashes and fell. "I told myself I would return it at the first opportunity. There was no opportunity. I did not seek one." The coachman, some yards off, made a business of checking the harness buckles he had already checked twice. "And now," she said, "now there is no more waiting to be done." He turned the glove slightly in his fingers, so the mended seam caught what little light the lantern gave. "You mend what other people throw away. I have watched you do it with a gown, with a ledger, with a household that did not deserve the keeping of it." His voice, always so carefully governed, roughened at the edge of the last word. "I did not come to offer you a ring, Miss Hale. I have nothing so simple to give you. I came only to return what was yours, and to ask you not to leave before I had done so." She did not take it at once. She looked at the glove, and then at his open hand beneath it, bare in the cold, and at the horse behind him blowing hard, steam rising off its flanks into the gray morning, and she understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once and without warning, exactly how far he had ridden, and in what haste, and why. The rain kept falling into the space between the carriage step and the ground, into the space she had not yet decided whether to cross. She stepped down. It was not a leap, not a swoon of surrender such as novels like to describe. It was a single, deliberate movement, her half-boot finding the wet cobble, her hand finding the frame of the carriage door for balance, and then she was standing in the rain, with the coaching inn's lantern guttering above her, and the ostler pretending very hard not to watch. The water came through her shawl almost at once. She did not appear to notice. She took the glove. Her fingers closed over it slowly, over the ridge of her own stitching, small and neat and visible, the mark of an evening spent mending what another woman would have thrown into the fire. She had made those stitches thinking of nothing but the tear itself, the practical fact of a seam come open, never imagining that a man would carry the result of her patience 15 miles through a dark morning to place it back into her hand as though it were the only gift he trusted himself to give. She did not thank him. She did not need to. The rain did that work between them, falling steadily on both their heads, indifferent to rank or fortune, and in its indifference oddly kind. What passed between them after, the words spoken low enough that even the ostler could not carry them into Chippenham's gossip, the slow walk back toward the inn's dim doorway, the carriage that was, in the end, sent on without her, belongs to no one's telling but their own. Some rooms a story does not enter. It is enough to know that she did not go north that day, and that the glove went with her wherever she went afterward. It was framed, eventually, and hung in the ducal library at Ashworth, among the account books, and the estate maps, and the ordinary machinery of a great house, not under glass in a place of honor, but low on a shelf where a hand might still reach it, where a woman, passing on her way to the ledgers, might touch the frame without thinking, the way one touches a door one has opened 1,000 times. Visitors who noticed it at all took it for some sentimental oddity of her grace's, a scrap of gray kid leather behind wood and glass, and asked, sometimes, what it meant. She answered them always the same way, in later years, when her hair had gone the color of the glove itself, and her hands had mended 100 smaller things since. She said only that it was a reminder of what a man had once chosen to keep, when it would have cost him nothing at all to let it be thrown away.